Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, the Comic Book Cast, and the Arun Mehta Show. Welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and we're going to be discussing about a particular video game series that means a lot to me and a lot of other people. We're going to be discussing about Mega Man, and I have with me a very special guest. He is one of the many people behind GameXplain. We have Ash Paulsen. Welcome, Ash.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, I'd like to know, what was your very first experience with Mega Man?
Man, okay, well, no pun intended, man. I'm pretty sure it was Mega Man 3. I think I got Mega Man 3 for, at least, well, that was the first Mega Man game I owned. I think I had rented Mega Man 2 from Blockbuster before that. Of course, Blockbuster, that's just showing my age right there. But I think I rented Mega Man 2 from Blockbuster and possibly Mega Man 1, and I think I must have liked it enough to specifically go for Mega Man 3 for the holidays one year and ask for that. And I remember I spent that holiday at my grandma's house, and I remember getting it. And I know I had a lot of trouble. I was just probably, 8 or 9 years old, so I couldn't beat Shadow Man. I could not beat Shadow Man for the life of me. And so back in the day, the only way I could beat Mega Man 3 or any Mega Man game was Game Genie. And it wasn't until older that I got, that my reflexes were honed enough to be able to just walk through most Mega Man games without any problems.
Wow. As for me, I think the very first Mega Man game, I don't remember whether it was either Mega Man 6 or probably Mega Man X for the Super Nintendo was my first introduction.
Nice. What a great first Mega Man game. For Mega Man X to be your first, that's what an experience.
Yeah, because I was introduced to gaming like around when I was about, I would say like maybe like 6 or 7, but a lot of kids were like into the Marios and the Zeldas and stuff like that. I don't think that like around my group of friends and family who were into video games, I don't think a lot of them really knew about Mega Man very much, unless maybe they were talking about like the cartoon, which, if you can believe it, the Ruby Spears cartoon.
Yep.
But for the most part, I think that those games might have been my first introduction to the series.
Okay. Well, I still remember I remember the day I got Mega Man X. I remember, I was a big Nintendo Power subscriber, so I would get, all the new news and upcoming previews of games and such every month in my mailbox. And I remember as a kid following Mega Man X's development as much as one could back in the day, because really your only window into these things was those monthly magazines because there's no internet. But I remember being hyped for Mega Man X for a long time as a kid, preteen, and I still remember the day I got it, and those stages felt impossibly huge. Like I remember it was such a big deal to find a new heart tank or a new sub tank or especially a new capsule, and those stages just felt impossibly big with all the little nooks and crannies. And to this day, I still love just like running through them and explore. Even though I know them like the back of my hand, they're just such fun levels to play through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All the fun levels, the music, the weapons, the secrets. Just a lot about them was able to stand out for me personally.
I hear you.
So, yeah, I'm thinking that maybe when, discussing about Mega Man, I'm thinking about, like, maybe, like, going, briefly discussing about what our thoughts of each game of each of the series, because there's, like, a lot of spin-offs and such, so...
Right.
I was thinking, let's discuss briefly about the, let's go through one of them at a time. So I guess we can start things off with the classic series. So as of right now, it's Mega Man's 1 through 10 and 1 through 5 on the Game Boy. And Mega Man 11 will be coming out around sometime this year. So, why don't you give your thoughts about each of them? As much as you want to. Why don't you start?
Cool. All right. Well, let's see. Mega Man 1, it's definitely unrefined by today's standards. You can tell that it's the series' Genesis in terms of, it's not quite as refined. The controls aren't quite as sharp. Mega Man slides a little bit when he stops, and, the level designs are pretty unforgiving. So Mega Man 1, it's still a decent game, but I don't think it's aged all that well by today's standards. Then, of course, you got Mega Man 2, which is the popular favorite, and not necessarily my favorite. I think Mega Man 2 is a really good game, but I do think it tends to fall apart a bit in the latter half of the game. I was never the biggest fan of the Wily Castle in Mega Man 2. You've got elements like the Boo Beam Trap and other, like that. That's the boss that you can only destroy with a Crash Bomber. And there's just certain parts of that game that I don't love playing through again today, even though I do think that the 8 Robot Master stages are some of the best level design I've ever seen. So I do think Mega Man 2 is a very good game, but I don't think it's necessarily the best, like so many fans seem to. Mega Man 3, I do think is a little better. In a great debate between 3 and 2, I do think 3 is the superior game, despite the fact that it was infamously rushed through development and had a kind of a problematic development, if you hear it told by Inafune, at least. But Mega Man 3 is great. It's got a fantastic soundtrack. It introduces Proto Man, of course, back then known as Breakman. 3 is great. I do love that they had those weird 2-player cheats. They had those debug cheats that they left in the game, so you could hold right on the second player D-pad, and suddenly Mega Man would be immortal, and you could have a space jump and things like that. It was almost like a built-in Game Genie. So that was kind of cool. And then, by the way, feel free to interject whenever you'd like. I don't want to.
No, go ahead. Absolutely. Go ahead. Continue.
So then Mega Man 4, not my favorite in the series. It's probably one of my less loved ones. Of course, it introduced Dr. Kozak, a new villain, and this Russian robot scientist who would end up becoming Mega Man's ally in later games. So it introduces Dr. Kozak along with Eddie and Kalinka. So we're kind of expanding the lore for the first time a bit with Mega Man 4 outside of Proto Man. And, Mega Man 4 is fine, but I think this was kind of a low point for me on the NES in terms of there are some really good music tracks, but I don't think it's quite as consistent. You've got really good stuff like Skull Man and the Dr. Kozak stages and the final Wily stage, but then you have songs like Dive Man and Ring Man and stuff that just don't really do it for me. So 4 maybe a relative low point for me, although when I say that, I mean I like it. I love it less than the others, so I don't hate Mega Man 4 or anything. And then moving on to Mega Man 5, which is actually my personal favorite in the classic series, which is a very unpopular opinion, and I do recognize 5's faults. Mega Man 5 is way too easy. The Super Mega Buster just completely demolishes any balance that game could have had. The special weapons aren't great. So 5 does have some problems, but I also think it's probably the best looking and best sounding game on the NES, period. I think that soundtrack is unbelievably fantastic. And if you compare the graphics, for example, to something like Mega Man 6, which I also like a lot, weirdly, though, the graphics were a bit of a downgrade in 6. They kind of scaled back some of the cool effects they had in 5, like Mega Man's giant Buster Shot and that really cool sound effect that you got with it. So 6 I felt was a bit of a step down in some ways, but 5 is just, it's got some incredible level designs. Its Gravity Man stage I think is really good. I like Gyro Man stage a lot. And plus you got the really cool story pitting Mega Man against what seems to be Proto Man, and you got that cool, that kind of anime like brother versus brother type thing going on. And of course, in the end, Proto Man's vindicated and it ends up being Dark Man, and Wily's of course behind it all yet again. But at the time, it was a really cool twist. And then you've got Mega Man 6, which has kind of a weird history because it never actually came out in Europe. And it was published by Nintendo, not Capcom. And Mega Man 6 came out when when the Super Nintendo was already a thing. So the attention had already been taken off the NES, which led Mega Man 6 to kind of struggle in terms of the public perception. But it shouldn't have, because it's a great game. 6 is actually aged very well, and it introduced some ideas in the series that would go on to become kind of a staple, such as the Jet Mega Man and the Power Mega Man suits, which would go on to be combined in the Super Adapter in Mega Man 7. So I really think Mega Man 6, as much as it was kind of overlooked back in its day, it's really worth going back to play today. It's kind of like the weird lost game in the series almost, although perhaps not as much as Mega Man 7, which also is kind of a weird. It came out at a weird place because it came out late into the Super Nintendo's life cycle, but it came out, I believe, right before Mega Man X3, either right before or after X3, and by that point, of course, people's attention, both fans and lay people, they were kind of focused on X, and people had kind of almost forgotten about classic Mega Man. So here Capcom comes with this brand new entry in Mega Man 7 that takes away wall jumping, it takes away dashing, and all these things that people had gotten used to in X. And for that reason, I think people in the day looked at Mega Man 7 as kind of a step back. And you've also got things like the really giant sprites, like the really big character sprites that are maybe a little too big relative to the size of the screen. But at the same time, though, yeah, you took away those X mechanics, but I still think 7 stands as a really strong entry in the classic series. And if you go into it from a fan perspective, knowing, okay, I'm not playing as X, I'm playing as Mega Man, which means no wall jumping, but I can slide, and it just means that the characters are going to be a little cuter, and the robots I'm destroying are going to be a little more googly eyed. But either way, it's still a great game. And despite that, you got that really, really dark moment at the end of Mega Man 7 where Mega Man's had it up to here with Wily. He's done, and he's got Wily held at buster point. And he's like, I'm going to do what I should have done all these years ago. And Wily's like terrified, and he's like, no, you can't. Don't forget the first rule of robotics: a robot can never harm a human. And it's like, wait a minute, this is Mega Man, and it just got really kind of dark and interesting. So people say that X is when Mega Man got edgy, which is mostly true, but you go look at Mega Man 7 and things got pretty dark in there too. And then you got Mega Man 8, which I used to be pretty lukewarm on. I like many people, I used to kind of look at that as the low point of the series, but I've actually come around on Mega Man 8 in recent years. I've replayed it a few times, especially thanks to the Legacy Collections now, and I really appreciate it for what it is and what it tried to do. It didn't succeed in everything, and I do still think the movement speed's a little too slow. There is too much emphasis put on beautiful animation, and there is beautiful animation. Like, it's a great looking game, but I think that did come at the expense of a little playability, but not as much as I used to think. And Mega Man 8 actually, I think, is quite a good game, way more than I used to give it credit for. And that's kind of why I'm really excited about Mega Man 11, jumping forward for a second, just because as much as I love 8-bit Mega Man games, 9 and 10 were both really great. I have long wanted Capcom and the series to really look forward and not backwards. And for that reason, I'm so into exactly what they're doing with 11, because it's a true current generation, forward-looking Mega Man game that doesn't just lean on the 8-bit visuals yet again.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But going back to 9 then, 9 and 10 were both really great retro revivals, and Mega Man 9 really, it's easy to forget these days, but that was actually the game that kind of kickstarted this whole Neo retro revival type thing, this kind of whole new 8-bit surge, and Mega Man 9 was kind of like the game that did that, and they're both great. And Mega Man 9, I would say, is very clearly designed to be as close to Mega Man 2 as possible, but I would say it's a better game than 2. So I would say that's probably both its greatest strength and its weakness, is the fact that 9 tried so hard to be another Mega Man 2, and I think it succeeded, and I think it's a better game than 2. However, the fact that it tried so hard to be 2 meant that it really lost out on having its own identity, and really just kind of feels like Mega Man 2, in my opinion. But then you got Mega Man 10, which may have been rougher around the edges than 9, maybe, but I actually like it a little more, just because it hewed a little closer to 4, 5, and 6 rather than the first 3 games. And I don't know, it felt like Inti Creates kind of having a chance to spread their creative wings and kind of do their own thing and kind of leave their own stamp on it, as opposed to Mega Man 9, which was very much Keiji Inafune kind of hovering over the project and saying, make it as much like 2 as you can, So 10, I think, gave them a little chance to leave their own mark on the series, and I think it was a great mark. And that brings us to Mega Man 11. Of course, there are the portable games as well, and I think most people already kind of know what I would say about those, which was, the first game was a pretty good litmus test for Mega Man on the Game Boy. It was fine. Mega Man 2 was trash. It was infamously outsourced to Minakuchi Engineering, I think they were called, and they clearly had no idea what Mega Man was or how to make it great. And so Mega Man 2 in the Game Boy, not great. Actually pretty bad. Mega Man 3, though, really cool return to form, and really served as a nice kind of prototype for what Mega Man 4 and 5 would end up being, which, in my view, are two of the best classic games in the series across any platform, NES, Super NES, PlayStation, whatever. Mega Man 4 and 5 in the Game Boy are two phenomenal titles, and if you are a fan of the series but you haven't played them because they're on Game Boy, fix that right now and go play them. So I guess those are my very truncated thoughts on the entire classic series.
Yeah, sounds great. As for, let's see, my thoughts. So, the first Mega Man, I do agree that it definitely hasn't aged very well. I kind of, like, put that in the sense of, like, NES games like the original Metroid or the original Legend of Zelda, in which, like, they were pretty good games for their time, but they certainly haven't aged very well, and their sequels are much better. They were able to fix the issues that the first game had.
Right.
And let's see, Mega Man 2, definitely is much more of a refined and improved sequel. It's definitely one of the best sequels of any video game that you would ever play. But I played it like a few years ago, and I noticed a lot of the flaws that it had. Like, for example, like, most of the weapons are pretty useless with the exception of the, with Metal Man's weapon. And also, the sprite flicker really just irritated me. It's
pretty bad, yeah. Back in the day, the sprite flickering could get pretty bad.
Yeah. And also, I also agree about the boss that you had to beat with Crash Band stage. I mean, if you didn't have the exact amount of weapon ammo for it, then you were done. You couldn't pass the level.
Yeah, all you could do literally was, like, die and then go back and collect weapon energy for the Crash Bomber, which there's no way you'd know that going through it the first time. And in my opinion, that's just bad game design 101. Like, and I don't know why so many people give Mega Man 2 a pass for that. It's like Mega Man 2 is untouchable, and yet it's guilty of very obvious bad game design sins. So I don't quite get that, but I suppose that's a topic for another day.
Sure. Mega Man 3 is, in my opinion, a much better game in terms of level design and weapons and also the soundtrack, which I would say between 2 and 3 is a bit of a tie. The first half is great, where you have like the 8 Robot Masters and you had Breakman, aka Proto Man, you're fighting off against him and trying to figure out who he is. But then when the Doc Robots showed up, it was just kind of like slowing down the game, and I felt like it was just padding for the sake of it.
That's fair. Yeah. I would say the Doc Robot part of Mega Man 3 is probably my least favorite, but everything around that, the first 8 stages in the Wily Castle, I liked a lot. And it's funny too, because I actually did like in 4, 5, and 6 how you had 2 castles. That felt not just like padding, but it felt like meaningful length, in my opinion. But I agree, like, that doesn't translate over to the Doc Robots.
No, it doesn't. I mean, there's no like introduction about like, oh, these Doc Robots work with Breakman and
yeah.
In fact, there's no introduction to Mega Man 3. It's just like, boop, here's the title.
Yeah, that was one of those games where, like was so often back in the day with NES games, you had to get most of the story, if there was any, through the instruction manual. So it's funny, like, if you just boot up Mega Man 3 and play it, you would have very little idea of what's actually going on in the story, other than Proto Man being introduced and saving Mega Man at the end and everything happening with Wily. But if you look at the instruction manual, you get all this backstory that, like, oh, Dr. Light's working with Dr. Wily, who's now reformed to work on a peacekeeping robot named Gamma, but they need 8 different elements from 8 different mining planets to finish Gamma. So every stage in Mega Man 3 of the first 8 stages, those are all on different mining planets. Like, Mega Man's literally traveling through space in this game, but you'd never know it if you didn't read the instruction manual.
Right, exactly. And I also felt that the weapons on 3, I mean, they are pretty good, but I feel like some of them are just like straightforward. Like, it shoots in a straight pattern. There's not a lot of variety in it.
Yeah, like the Spark Shock and the Needle Cannon, and yeah, they just kind of come straight out. It's not the most creative spread of weapons.
Yeah, and also weapons like the Top Spin and the Gemini Laser, they're very hard to use.
They are, especially, I think the Gemini Laser, it's a cool weapon, but because you can only have one on the screen at a time, you have to really make sure your aim is true. Otherwise, you have to wait for it to bounce off the wall a few times and disappear before you can fire another one.
Right. So yeah, Mega Man 4, I actually do know somebody named Nathaniel Hoover, aka Gemini Laser, who he claims that Mega Man 4 is his favorite because he's able to he was able to find the positives in it. He liked the fact that, Mega Man had the Mega Buster, which was the first time in which you had the chargeable shot, and also, the fact that you were able to take, like, multiple paths. You can get goodies like, more E-tanks, or maybe, like, the extendable arm or the balloon adapter.
Right.
And, it introduced Dr. Cossack, which was a completely different villain than Dr. Wily. And, he would also play a bit of an important part later on because he was the one who invented Beat. But,
right.
Yeah, I mean, and also, the weapons were a lot more varied, I think. You had the Pharaoh shot, and you had, the dive missile, and a whole bunch of...
The rain flush.
Yeah, the reflush was also really awesome. So, yeah, for the most part, the weapons are definitely much more varied, but... some of the stages are okay, and also the ending with Dr. Wily just escaping is kind of ridiculous.
Oh, I know. He tends to always escape. And going back to Dr. Cossack for a second, I always thought it was funny. Well, I didn't realize it as a kid because it's just not the kind of thing you realize when you're younger. But as I got older, I realized just how ridiculously on the nose and stereotypical Dr. Cossack himself is, because his full name is Dr. Mikhail Sergeyevich Cossack, which... you might as well be calling him Dr. Russia. Like, it's the most on-the-nose name you could possibly have for a Russian scientist, and I always thought that was funny looking back.
Yeah, it's almost like Punch-Out in a sense, in which it has
exactly.
such stereotypical names depending on who came from which country.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of aged poorly in the same way that Mega Man 6 is like Flame Man and Tomahawk Man have aged poorly. It's like, ooh, going back and looking at their designs by today's standards, it's like, oh man, that would not fly today.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess it makes kind of a little bit of sense because...
oh, it does.
I mean, when did Mega Man 4 come out? Like around the late 80s?
Oh, it came out early 90s. So,
okay,
I mean, it totally makes sense by the standards of the time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this was like, toward the end of the Cold War.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so 5, I'm kind of mixed with 5. On the one hand, I do think that the Mega Buster is awesome. Some of the Robot Masters are cool, and also I like some of the music. In terms of like, this is a Mega Man game, that's easy. It's like, yeah, maybe for like the hardcore fans that's an issue, but what about for kids who are playing it for the first time? And maybe, some games like maybe Mega Man 1, 2, and 3 are very difficult and they can't pick it up. So I think that maybe at that point in time in which when gaming was a little bit more mainstream, it kind of made a little bit more sense.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, and I think with 5, I mean, I think it's good that you have an entry-level Mega Man game where, it kind of brings newer or less experienced players into the fold. But I do think 5 kind of, and again, it's my favorite, but I do think it kind of furthered the problem 4 started with the Mega Buster, which I like the Mega Buster. I like that it's, I love the charge shot. I don't think that ever should have been taken away from him in 9 and 10. But I do think the game needed to be better balanced around the charge shot, and the fact that the charge shot just laid waste to everything like it did in 4 and 5, and really, it was more of a problem than 5 than in 4, but it made it so you really didn't want to use anything but the Mega Buster or the Super Mega Buster in 5's case. And so it just kind of defeated the point of collecting all these different weapons. But this is something you don't see in 11, for example, which I played at a few preview events. And the fact that Mega Man does have all of his powers, he has sliding, and he has not only his charge shot, but a really powerful charge shot too. That's even like a higher level one. But enemies take enough damage in that game to where it doesn't feel like it's super OP.
Yeah. As for Mega Man 6, I actually did get introduced to it. Like I said before, it was probably my very first Mega Man game. I don't know how I got introduced to it. Either it was at my family's house, like maybe my cousin's house, or maybe it was during its school time, in which I think I may have told this story before, but when I was a kid, my teacher used to have something called free time, in which around Fridays, if you did your homework and if you did really well on your assignments, then you get to have like at least 10 to 15 minutes to either, go into the corner and play, or, draw something, or listen to music, or she had a TV with an NES, and she had a few games, and, you got to play those games, and maybe that was where I got introduced to it, I'm not sure, but I think that Mega Man 6, I really do like the game as well. One of the things that I really do like is that there's representation of, the Robot Masters from each of the different countries, even though that, similar to what you were saying about, like, Flame Man and Tomahawk Man, that's definitely more politically incorrect by today's standards.
Right. Yeah, I mean, of course, back you have to, of course, take it for the time that it came out too. I mean, the story of Mega Man 6 is that there's this robot world tournament or world robot tournament, whatever it is, where all the most powerful robots from every corner of the world come together and compete. So it makes sense that you'd have these internationally themed robot masters. But the fact that the fact that Flame Man works in an oil field and has a turban, it's like, oh man, But again, Japan's an island nation, and this was back in the early 90s. So this was a completely different time. There's really, this isn't something that Capcom, in no way do I think Capcom was intentionally trying to offend anybody. Like, no way, not even close. It's just funny the way you look at how things were a little different back then compared to how they are today.
Yeah, exactly. And not to mention that with Mega Man 6, two of the Robot Masters were designed by kids from North America.
Right. I used to know their names too. Mike. Oh man, no, I can't remember now. I thought I used to. Yeah, I used to know their names.
I think it was Michael Leader and.
It was Michael Leader. Okay.
And the second one was
What's his name? Daniel something.
Yeah,
right?
Daniel something. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I remember thinking how cool that was because my friends and I.
Oh, I got it. Daniel Padilla.
Nice. Okay, there you go. But I remember thinking how cool that was because my friends and I, we would also design our own Robot Masters. Like, I remember specifically back before Mega Man 6 was a thing, my friend and I made a Mega Man 6, Robot Master design pamphlet thing. And, of course, as kids are wont to do. But I remember thinking how cool it would have been to actually have your design used.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was even a segment of Nintendo Power in which, kids would even, draw various Mega Man characters, and then, they would, display it, and, it would look kind of, pretty funny.
Yeah, oh no, I remember that too. You see that every year in Nintendo Power, every month in Nintendo Power, and you get some really, really, really interesting ones too, really well designed. You'd have the ones obviously sent in by younger kids who are just doodles, which are also really cute, but you'd have some that were really, really well done.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder about, maybe, if they would have, carried this over. I mean, I know that, Mega Man, pretty much a lot of the Mega Man games, they would always have, contests in which kids would, draw various characters and they would submit it over. But for the most part, it was, all Japanese. It would be nice if maybe we could have had, more of those. I mean, maybe, if Mega Man 11 does well, maybe they'll do another contest for that for Mega Man 12.
Hopefully, that would be really nice to see that come back. And I know 11. Although I will say there is something to be said for the advantages of having the entire set of Robot Masters designed in house. Because from what I've seen so far, 11 has one of my favorite sets of Robot Masters in the series to date. God, their designs are so cool and so on point.
Awesome. Well, that makes me even more excited to check it out.
Yeah, no, you can, there's plenty of preview coverage out there right now, but you don't have to wait very long. It comes out October 2nd, so we're only 5 weeks away now.
That's great, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Mega Man 7, yeah, I at first, this is as for me with Mega Man 7, I played through this recently. I didn't remember anybody talking about Mega Man 7. This was when everybody was getting into the X series or the cartoon. But yeah, I know it's ironic, but anyway, I didn't really play through Mega Man 7 until I got the Legacy Collection. And I guess I can see a lot of the complaints that, Mega Man's sprite is really, really big and that it moves kind of slow and he doesn't have the the dash or jumping through walls, and maybe some of the music is not that memorable. But then I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that they only had 3 months to make this game.
Yeah, exactly. It was an incredibly rushed development cycle, which, when you consider how good Mega Man 7 is, despite that, yes, Mega Man 7 has its problems, and it's, a little bit rough around the edges in some ways, but when you consider the fact that it was made in 3 months, it actually is quite impressive, in my opinion.
Yeah, because, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of people in if they know about video game history, they would know about some other games that were made in less than a couple of months.
I mean, hell, I can tell you, I've produced a few games, and I've been in the game development side of things, and making any game in 3 months is a very, very difficult task. So whether it's a 2D platformer like that or, let alone a game by today's standards, but game development is never easy. That I can tell you from experience. And the fact that they made it in 3 months, my hat goes off to them, because I can absolutely guarantee you that was a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of hard work.
So basically, when I was playing through the game, I did notice that I think that, Nathaniel Hoover even mentioned this, that one of the issues on Mega Man 7 was that it starts you off with 4 Robot Masters. And one of the good things about having all 8 of them available is that there's so many options for you to play in many ways. If you want to start off with this Robot Master, you can start off with this Robot Master, and it just kind of like give you a whole bunch of variety of, I want to play through this one first, I want to play through that one first. But since it's basically cut in half, there's not a lot of variety when it comes to like choosing stages, because then you have to wait for the next set of robots to come by.
Right. That was the way that the Game Boy games did it. And for whatever reason, they decided to take that design philosophy from the Game Boy games and apply it to 7 and 8, which I don't know if it was necessarily worse, in my opinion. It was just kind of different. And it was kind of interesting having what felt like a first half of the first part of the game and then the second half of the first part of the game. It was kind of a different way to pace a Mega Man game. But I think most people in general prefer having the full spread of 8 Robot Masters to pick from the very beginning. And I think that's why 9 and 10 brought that back, as well as 11.
Yeah, and I can understand that for the Game Boy games, because it's for the Game Boy. It's very limited. Maybe they couldn't cram all 8 Robot Masters into one. I can understand that. And
right.
Maybe, they thought, because we're delving more into a story-driven Mega Man, we want to make this a little bit more epic. It's like, there's only 4 Robot Masters. And then, no, it's coming into 8 now. And, what's Dr. Wily going to do? So I guess in a sense, it was trying to experiment with a couple of things, but I guess maybe due to time constraints and them having a limited amount of time, maybe they couldn't flesh out as much as they wanted to.
Yeah, and that could very well be.
Yeah, so I haven't gotten like I don't really understand like the full hatred for this game. Like everybody's saying like, Mega Man 7 is not as good as like, the previous games, is not as good as Mega Man X, but I think that when you take into those accounts, I think that it's the flaws can be validated just a little bit, but there are some good things about it. I mean, basically what it's trying to do, it was trying to be like a callback through the previous games, because it had been around for quite a while, like almost a decade at that point, and so a lot of people had fond memories of, the classics, and, jumping into Mega Man X. It's like it was a return to form. Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, of course, Mega Man X is probably my favorite game in the entire series, like the whole franchise. So I'm not going to sit here and say I think 7 is as good as or better than X, because I don't. However, in its own context, I do think 7 is incredibly unfairly underrated and passed over. And I do think it's way better than it's given credit for being. But I would say most games next to the original Mega Man X don't hold up favorably, only because Mega Man X is so good.
Right. And you can tell that what like during the time of the makings of Mega Man 6, that, Mega Man X was like their next step into their, the Mega Man franchise. So you can tell that that's where they were leaning towards next.
Exactly.
So Mega Man 8. Oh God, where do I start with this? Worst voice acting ever.
Oh, worst, but also best, just because I don't know. I have a weird fascination and love for things that are so bad they're actually great. So yes, even though the voice acting in Mega Man 8 and by extension Mega Man X4 are horrifically bad, I actually have kind of come around to enjoying it. And to me, that's part of Mega Man 8's DNA. It's like it wouldn't feel like Mega Man 8 to me if it didn't have trashy voice acting.
I guess so. I mean, I guess, there's a couple of things that I can tolerate so bad it's good, but when something is bad, I just usually kind of point it out.
That's fair.
Let's see. I think that, it also does the same thing as 7, in which, like, they had the 4 Robot Masters available. And also, I think that the levels drag on a little bit too long.
Yeah, they do. I would say, I do like longer levels in Mega Man games. I will say that much. And I do think, like, for example, with Mega Man 9 trying to hew so closely to Mega Man 2, I felt that its levels were way too short. But yeah, I think 8 probably goes too far the other way, and its levels are a little bit long in the tooth. Especially when you get, there's some that are really fun, like Grenade Man and Aquaman and such. Like, those are really fun levels. But then you get some that feel like they're a bit long, like Frost Man's, because of the jump, slide sections, and like Astro Man's with the maze parts. So, yeah, there are some levels that get a little long in the tooth. I have to agree with that.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that, again, with trying to build an epic story like what they did with 7, again, I can see that they were trying to create an epic story with a duo and the evil spirits and all that kind of stuff, and I can give them credit for that, but I think that it's marred by its voice acting and its presentation. I mean, it tried to do something cool, but you just can't take it seriously because it's just laughable.
It is. I mean, especially at the time, too, it was definitely, I probably looked on it less favorably than I do now. But, I guess the way I see it is I'm able to fill in my own head the way it's supposed to be taken and the way it's, it's more serious, I guess, in my head than it is on the screen. And I don't know, maybe it's because of my own background as having, with my dad being, one of a huge voice actor or not. But I don't know. In a way, I somehow appreciate bad voice acting, and I'm just able to laugh at it like, Bass, why must we fight? We are not enemies. It's like, not only does he sound stupid, but like he's called him Bass. Like, how could you not at least get a bit of a chuckle out of that? Because you can just hear them in the recording studio with like Dr. Light being Elmer Fudd going like, we may be able to locate the media in the Wadar womb. It's like you can just hear them in the recording studio being like, okay, nailed it, got it, man, you guys just killed it. You guys are on your game today. And it's like, who thought this was passable?
I don't know.
It's crazy.
Yeah, for everybody who thought that Resident Evil had bad voice acting.
Oh man, yeah.
It's kind of, I'm conflicted because Resident Evil tried to take itself seriously with the haunted house thing, but it's marred by bad voice acting. But Mega Man, it's light in tone. It's trying to be all epic and stuff, and I don't know. It's hard. I probably need to have a sit down and think about it.
I would say it was actually more egregious because even though Mega Man sounds silly in 8, that's actually the way he's supposed to sound. Like, he's supposed to sound like a kid. So
yeah, sure.
I always prefer when Mega Man sounds like the kid he's supposed to. Now, for me, though, it was a much bigger problem, and it's still kind of a problem for me when I go back and play Mega Man X4. As much as I love that game, X shared the same voice. It was Ru Shiraishi. X shared the same voice actor with Mega Man, and that should never have happened. X is never supposed to sound like a child, and that still bothers me. So I totally get what you're saying, and although at the same time I really enjoy Zero's story because of his terrible voice acting and the whole Iris thing. So I enjoy that in a different way than the fact that I'm actually kind of turned off by X sounding like a kid in X4, just because he's not supposed to.
Yeah, why must Reploids fight?
Oh man, yeah.
Okay, moving on. So, Mega Man 9 and 10. I kind of see these games as sort of like the yin and yang. Mega Man 9 bringing it back into full form, being like Mega Man 2. Definitely, I think in my opinion, it has the best selection of weapons. And the level design is actually really creative and varied. Yes. And I also really love the music. I would say, like, as a return to form, like, I know Mega Man 7 tried to do that, but I think in terms of that, I think Mega Man 9 did it a lot better.
Yeah, I would agree with that, for sure.
Mega Man 10, I feel like it's a little bit too hard. Like, I know that there's some level design that's a little bit rough, and some of the music is also a little bit rough. Some of the weapons, I feel, is not as fully thought out. I just felt like they were just trying to, like, catch lightning in a bottle twice.
Hey, you know what? That's a completely fair assessment, and I will agree. Even though I may like 10 a little more than 9 ultimately, just because I feel it's a more unique stamp on the series, has more of its own identity, I completely agree with that in terms of trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice. I mean, Mega Man 9 was that. It was the, forerunner for that neo-retro kind of revival type style of game. But Mega Man 10, by the time that game came around, having that 8-bit art style in 2010 wasn't as novel, because Mega Man 9 had already done it, and then many other games had followed suit between Mega Man 9 and 10. Yeah. So by the time 10 came around, having that retro art style wasn't as much of a gimmick or a draw as it was with 9. So I agree with you. At the same time, though, again, because 9 tried so hard to be 2 and wore that influence so clearly on its sleeve, I think I just appreciated 10 for being a little more surprising and just a little weirder, a little more offbeat. But at the same time, that also came with some downgrades in certain ways. Like, again, the weapons. Like, Mega Man 10's weapons are not nearly as good as 9's, which I would agree with you. 9's might be among the best in the whole series. But 10 soundtrack, while maybe it's not as consistent as 9's, the highs are really, really high. And again, you just got things like, I think the Wily Castle is more fun in 10. I think the Robot Master themes are a little more interesting in 10. You've got weird ones like Blade Man and Strike Man, as opposed to 9, which was very much that kind of standard elemental spread of like, fire, water, stuff like that.
Sure,
lightning, stuff like that.
I feel like Mega Man 9 knew what it wanted to be, and I feel like 10 was just trying to be like all experimental. So
that's a perfect way to put it. I would agree with that.
So I think that with the fact that they knew what they wanted to make in terms of the process of making Mega Man 9, I think it came out the way that it did because they knew what they wanted to do, and they were able to focus on that.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally hear you there.
And with 10, while, making something different because, retro revivals are becoming really popular. Like Klonoa, like there's Klonoa, let's see what else was there, like Contra 4 and, like a whole bunch of games were like going into the revival thing. I think there was like the new Super Mario Brothers games, like the Wii version came out and...
Right.
So, that was basically around the time in which, like, all these old video games that we, grew up with during the 80s and 90s were starting to make a comeback. And, 2010 was also the year that Super Meat Boy came out, like, pretty much like the prototype of indie games to come. So,
yeah.
Mega Man 10 was sort of like... I'm a old school Mega Man game, but guess what? We already had this before, and there's already a bunch of indie games that are calling back to old school games, so, you have to step up your game if you want to be able to stand out, so...
Yeah.
I mean, not that I don't hate Mega Man 10, it's just that, I just feel like, they were, like I said, trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice, trying to do something different, and it didn't fully come through.
No, that's a totally fair assessment of 10, I think.
Yeah, so I think we can... and as for the Game Boy games, I've never played them, so I can't say anything about that.
Well, I highly recommend you go and play 3 through 5 at least, whenever you can.
Sure. All right, let's talk about the X games.
All right, so the X games, man. Well, I'll start all this off by saying that X is my favorite character of all time, from anything, any kind of media, any series, period. You can talk about Zero all you want, and I do think they're an awesome duo, and I like Zero for what he is, but X is my boy, my favorite character ever. And so with that said, the original Mega Man X game is probably my favorite 2D platformer of all time. It's certainly my favorite Mega Man game of all time. It's just... I mean, what can I possibly say about Mega Man X that has not been already said? It is a masterclass in 2D platformer game design. The way that game teaches you to play itself, and it does not use any sort of heavy-handed tutorial to teach you what to do. It literally uses the level design to teach you how to play it. And it's the perfect game for its time. I mean, it was a little edgier, a little aged up from classic Mega Man, and you got this kind of harder edged anime world, and you've got these cool Mavericks who are themed after various animals, and it was just a really smart way to kind of age up the Mega Man series just enough, not too much. It didn't make it so gritty and realistic that it, turned its core audience off, but it was just enough to make it feel like you were playing something a little grittier and a little edgier than the classic Mega Man. And I mean, God, the soundtrack's phenomenal. The story was cool. You've got this great underdog story of X learning who he is and kind of learning to come to grips with his power and, not really sure what kind of power he has. And, of course, by the end of the game, he's not only matched Zero's power, who's kind of his mentor, but he's kind of, if not only matched it, exceeded it. And that's certainly true later in the games with like X4 and beyond. But it's just you've got this whole thing where you're constantly trying to get more powerful, and you've got this ideal to live up to, who's Zero, and then you eventually match that and surpass it and go defeat Sigma. And oh man, it's just everything about X was so right on the money. There's not a single thing about that game that I can say is disappointing in my opinion, or off or anything. And then X2 was very much a strong sequel. I would say X2 is mostly as good as X. It's not quite there. The music wasn't as good. Some of the level gimmicks were a little irritating. Like, I'd never enjoy playing through Magna Centipede stage. I didn't enjoy it back in the day. I don't enjoy it now. I wouldn't say the X Hunter stages are as fun as the Sigma stages from X1. But X2 in general is a very good follow-up to X1, and I would say it's like maybe 85% of the way as good, of being, there as being as good. And yeah, I like X2. You've got that really cool, the mechanic with the X Hunters, where you've got to collect Zero's parts, and you have kind of a slightly branching story. You can either fight Zero toward the end or not. It's not a huge branch, but it is a branch, and that's kind of cool. And then you've got Mega Man X3, which, I don't know, a lot of people give X3 a hard time, and I agree that it threatens to kind of buckle under the weight of its own ambition. There are probably way too many collectibles in that game, and it's just a little too dense in terms of all the things there are to collect and do in that game. But at its core, it's still a great game, in my opinion. The gameplay is still there. The controls are still fantastic. The physics are on point. I like a lot of the Mavericks, Blizzard Buffalo. Toxic Seahorse is one of my favorites just because of the absurdity of that name. You got really cool Maverick designs in that game. Blast Hornet, maybe a few too many fish. You got like Crush Crawfish and Volt Catfish, which I wasn't quite sure why that was needed. But I mean, overall though, X3 was a good, I would say, if not a step forward, it was keeping things afloat, and it was a good way to tread water. And it wasn't a bad game by any means. And you got Zero's first playable appearance, although probably not in the way many fans wanted him to be playable. But that would be fixed very quickly in X4, which is my other favorite game in the X series, which I think is probably true for most people. If it's not X, it's X4. And X4, of course, brought Zero into the fold, playable full time. And that was really great. The way his story is meaningfully different from X's. The way he plays is completely different from X in a way that feels important. You've got X as the long-range fighter. You've got Zero as the close-range one. He gets a completely different set of techniques than X's special weapons. So I really like the way X4 kind of brought Zero into the game full-time. And, of course, you've got X4. I mean, this could be its own podcast, honestly. But X4 has a shockingly good story in terms of how relevant its themes can be today. And I mean, you can say that, a lot of people like to dismiss video game stories as being kind of trite or not all that deep. And that is true in a lot of cases. And it's funny to be saying this about a Mega Man game, but the way that the Repliforce are branded as Mavericks without actually having done anything wrong really kind of underscores an interesting way an interesting evolution in the term of in the term Maverick across the series. Because starting off, the term Maverick is literally used to mean any Reploid that malfunctions and turns against its human creators and endangers humans. But when you fast forward to X4, now you've got the Maverick Hunters and the government just branding anybody whose actions they disagree with, whether they threaten humans or not. Anyone they disagree with or whom they say is becoming unruly for any reason, hey, they're Mavericks. And they are treated as such and destroyed as such. And it's really interesting when you go back and look at X4's story, and you just kind of, even by today's standards, it's still relevant. And it's still really interesting the way the Repliforce are branded as Mavericks, even though they didn't do anything wrong, really. They just wanted to assert their independence. So anyway, that could be its own podcast. Suffice to say, X4 is awesome. I love it. And then the rest of the series, X5, it's okay. It's fine. It was originally supposed to be the end of the series, and it should have been, because everything that came after, well, not everything that came after, but a lot of what came after really sucked. And X5 was average across the board. It was a fine ending, good enough, but not as good as it should have been. And it's not a game I look back on fondly. It's fine to play through by today's standards, but there's no passion there. It's Mega Man X by the numbers. It feels like X4, but with all the passion and all the creativity just stripped out of it. And what you're left with is a patently average game. Although I will say that the recent Mega Man X Legacy Collection 2 did help fix one of my major issues with it, which was the Guns N' Roses names. I always hated those. They drove me crazy, and I'm so glad that they got rid of them in the Legacy Collection version. But then X6, it's trash. I mean, let's just be honest. It's not okay. Maybe trash is no. It's trash. It is. It's so bad. The level designs are a mess, and the nightmare system where you've got. I mean, X6's idea of difficulty is to just fill the screen with enemies and shots and bullets until you have literally no choice but to take damage, and you just have to tank damage the whole way through, and it's just not fun. And there's also the fact that if you miss rescuing certain Reploids, you could possibly lose out on an upgrade that makes one of the final gate stages impossible to beat as X, which is just bad. I mean, that's just bad game design right from the get-go. So, you got that. But the reason I kind of doubled back on saying X6 was trash is because for as bad as X6 is, X7 is way worse. And X7 actually is trash. Like, and I don't say that about games very often. Like, I'm very much, you know, I like to be respectful of developers and respectful of how difficult and arduous the game creation process can be, and it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
but X7 is terrible.
Even whenever you guys talk about like a game that has severe flaws, at least you guys give it the respect, and you guys talk about some of the highlights. You don't go off and saying like 0 out of 10, pure flaming garbage.
Right, exactly. But and that is exactly why I say that, because X7 really is 0 out of 10, just flaming, burning garbage. And I mean, there is not a single redeeming quality about that game, literally not one, except unless you look at terrible voice acting as a redeeming quality. And in this game's case, it might be, because you do have the infamous flame Hyanark with the whole burn to the ground over and over again. And yeah, so X7 is just awful across the board. It did introduce Axel, who he gets a better shake in X8, which is nice because I actually do like the character. But X7 was not a good debut for him, and nobody liked him in X7. But X8 was a good return to form. X8 was surprisingly good and is a nice blueprint for what I would like to see from a future game, with some refinements, of course. Not everything about X8 was great. Those 2 3D stages were terrible. But in general, X8 was a quite surprisingly good return to form. And if Mega Man X9 does not go the Sonic Mania route of having like a new 16-bit style but with like modern flourishes, then I could see it taking the X8 route and also still being quite good.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Maybe if Mega Man 11 does very well, then maybe we might even get another Mega Man X game.
I gotta say, at this point, I kind of almost feel like it's an inevitability. Like, of course, you can't say that for sure, but, you know, there's that whole thing with the Mega Man X Legacy Collection soundtrack coming out recently in Japan, and the liner notes for the soundtrack talking specifically saying it had a timeline of all 8 X games, and then the space for the next one says X's story is not yet over. So if that isn't implicit confirmation that another X game is coming at some point, I don't know what is.
Sounds pretty good.
Right?
All right, so yeah, Mega Man X. I've already stated that it was, it might have been the first game I've ever played. I remember when I first played through it and had like very little knowledge about Mega Man. I thought it was just like the coolest thing ever. It's like, wow, you have this robot and he's traveling around different sections and he's getting cool weapons and the music's awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, that kind of stuff. And you know, replaying it again, yeah, definitely, it's still a great game. It's one of those games that you have to look really, really hard to find problems. I think that maybe one of the issues that I did have problems with was when doing the dash, you have to push, like, I think it was either like the B or the A button, and or the Y button, and it gets a little bit uncomfortable. When, you know, nowadays if I want to do the dash, I'm pretty much used to pushing like the L or R1 buttons.
Me too. I am a hardcore R dasher. I used to be a double tap dasher, and I still do that once in a while, but a friend of mine introduced me to R dashing, and I swear by it now. I just can't do anything else.
Yeah. So, you know, some parts of the controls just haven't aged very well, but yeah, just replace it with another replace it with an R L1 dash, and you're fine. You don't have to worry about it. And yeah, I think that's like one of the major issues that I personally have with it. I don't really have any issues that I can think of on the top of my head. I mean, maybe some people would say like, oh, you know, the water level is a little bit too slow, or maybe like the hallway leading up to Sigma stage when you're trying to jump up and it has the robots going after you is a little bit of a pain or something like that. But I just find those to be like really minor nitpicks. I think that the game is still great. X2, yeah, I think X2 is still a pretty good game. I mean, it had a lot to live up to Mega Man X because it was such a groundbreaking achievement. Yeah, there were some things I do like about it, and, you know, I mean, it's a pretty good sequel. I mean, that's what I would just describe Mega Man X2. It's just a really good sequel. They added, like, a few extra things to it, and, yeah, I think that it's pretty solid. X3, I know that they try to add in a whole bunch of things, but I just felt it was like a little bit of a sidestep. And I think from what I've heard, I think they were like not as focused on X3 because a lot of them were focusing on doing X4. So it definitely shows because, you know, they were trying to be really experimental. I guess maybe because they didn't want to have the series to feel a little bit stale. which, it's fine if you want to try to do something new to it, but make it in a way that, feels intuitive, not just feels forced and kind of unnecessary.
Right.
X4, my friend was doing it for a Let's Play channel a few years ago where I joined alongside with him, and, the gameplay was awesome, the weapons were pretty cool, we had fun making fun of the voice acting. Let's see, what else? The music was also pretty cool, too. Probably not as iconic as the first game, but I also did like the music on that, and I also like some of the...
Me too.
And I also like the fact that Magma Dragoon was actually, like, a big part of the story, like, in terms of, like, he was, like, shown in the beginning of the story, and then you got to fight him later on, and I thought that was pretty cool. And
and I love the way that Magma Dragoon kind of plays on X's naivete, and how he's just kind of like... X can't possibly cannot fathom for the life of him why anybody would want to cause so much suffering just for a chance at fighting him. He really is so good, and he has so much goodness and is so pure. He really just doesn't get it, and that's what I think I continue to love about X's character, is that he's so thoroughly good and is such a pacifist that no one can corrupt him in that sense. And of course that is also a weakness that also allows other people to take advantage of him, like we saw with like Mac in X3 and Magma Dragoon in X4. But I don't know, he never succumbs to being that kind of like, I don't know, he never gets to the point where he's just over it all. Well, he does eventually in the Zero series, I guess, which is a very interesting part of his character. But yeah, I just love that he's just so thoroughly good.
Sure. Let's see. After that, I think the only one that I did play out of the rest of the games was X7, and that was renting it. I rented it.
I'm so sorry that's the only one.
After that, I rented X7. I didn't play through anything else, and then I rented it for like 1 weekend at Blockbuster, and I was like, nope, done. And then I never touched anything else ever again throughout the X series.
Oh, if you can, go play X8. It's way better. It is absolutely a return to form after X6 and 7. But you can definitely skip the other. X5. X5 might be worth it just for the story, because it does actually do some cool things with the story, but the game itself is just kind of meh.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Now that we have the X collection, we can actually, play through that as opposed to like spending like $99 on eBay.
Exactly.
Okay, so after this, I haven't played a lot of the other Mega Man games. I didn't play through Legends or Battle Network or Star Force or the Zero series. So, I mean, if you want to talk your opinions on them, then please go ahead.
All right. Well, I'll just try to. That's a lot of games to cover, so I'll try to give my very quick thoughts here. But the Zero series, I love Zero in the Zero series. That's my favorite version of the character. It's got some of my favorite art across any video game series. Period. God, I love the character designs in the Zero series. Like, it's crazy how good they are, and I love the story. I would say that in terms of being a complete story and the way it's told, I would say the Zero series is probably the best in the entire Mega Man franchise, because you've got this story that both serves as a meaningful sequel to the X series, taking place 100 years after it, but also really has its own really beautifully done beginning, middle, and end. And the way 04 ends, if that doesn't tug at your heartstrings and get you wiping something out of your eyes at the very end there, I don't know what will. Because yeah, it's funny when you talk about a Mega Man game tugging at the heartstrings and being emotionally resonant, but screw that, they totally can be. And Mega Man 04 is proof, and really the entire Zero series is proof. I love Zero's character arc in that series. I love the relationship between him and X, how things have been reversed, and now X is kind of the mentor, and he's the one who's been around and doing, seeing all this crap and going through everything, and now he's the one guiding Zero because he's just over it all. And I just love what this series does to Zero and X as characters, and the gameplay is a lot of fun. The first game is not as refined as the ones that would come after it, so if you go back and play them today, Mega Man 01 feels pretty rough around the edges, but 2 and 3 especially are excellent games, and 4 is also really good. So great games, and they probably have the best story in the entire franchise, if I'm being honest.
So the Zero series only has like 4 games, right?
Right.
And you would feel that, with everybody's like saying like, oh, bring this back. I mean, for the way that sounds, it doesn't sound like you need to have another, like a game, like a 05 or anything like that, because it feels like it completed everything.
100%. And there are fans who still they'll say, oh man, I really hope we get a Mega Man 05 someday. And I'm standing over here like, why? Why would you hope that? Because literally the way 04 ended was perfect. It ties up all the loose ends and it leads perfectly into the ZX series. So yes, I understand wanting another game where you play as Zero. I get it. But at the same time, I wouldn't ruin the way 04 ended that series for anything. It was a perfect ending. And it was just a perfect way for Zero's character to end up as well. So, yeah, no, I hear you. Some people do want that, but I agree it's not necessary at all.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. The same thing with Battle Network, actually. It's a perfect segue into Battle Network. That also is another complete story that began with 1 and ended with 6, and it ended on a definitive note. And it wasn't quite as perfectly wrapped up and, with a bow as 0, but it was certainly wrapped up enough, and to the point where I don't really feel like there ever needs to be a Battle Network 7. But I would love to see another sequel series because I adore Battle Network. I played every single game. Yes, the random encounter rate got a little crazy, especially playing every single one, but there's so much charm, and I love the idea of taking Mega Man's Robot Masters and reimagining them as these net-navy kind of digital avatar presences who, they go and, I don't know, like Battle Network almost felt like it had this vision of a near-future world that was not all that unrealistic, and so Battle Network came out in the early aughts, so that was before wireless communication technology had really kind of gotten into its stride, right? And you have this vision of and so you have this vision of a near future world where everyone, kids, adults, elderly people, everyone has their PET, their PET, or their personal terminal, which has this, it's like a digital communication device that they use to interface with everything. Home appliances, each other, chat applications, message boards. It's kind of weird in how accurate it kind of ended up being in terms of how we live today. And I mean that of course is completely superfluous to just them being great games, but they were just really fun games. The stories felt like really fun Saturday morning anime episodes where they're not too serious, but they got just serious enough to where there felt like there were real stakes involved. But I love the character designs. I love the relationship between Land and Mega Man EXE, and I just really love the Battle Network world, and I would love to see them do something more with it. But I also understand that Battle Network 6 really ended the story on a pretty definitive note. And then, of course, you got Star Force, which was taking place 100 years after that specific series. And, Star Force is a weird thing because it took too long to find its stride. And I think that was the problem, is that Star Force 1 just wasn't very good. It was a subpar game. And then Star Force 2 was better, but not quite there. And then Star Force 3 was actually great, but it was just too little too late. It took the series too long to find its footing, and by then the sales damage had already been done, and people just weren't tuning in for Star Force anymore. But it's a shame because I played all 3 of them, and 3 was great. And but I will say that even if they didn't get to make more of them, I will say that it's good that they got to end the story. Again, Star Force is the third example of a Mega Man series that was ended definitively without the need for a sequel. So I do like that they ended Geo's story on a high note with 3 and kind of brought all the loose ends back together. So Star Force definitely flawed compared to Battle Network, but 3 was actually really good, and I kind of wish it had a chance to go beyond that because it had finally found its stride. But who knows? Maybe we'll see another. I still talk to people about how I think another Battle Network series that fully realizes the kind of wireless communication we have now, like with systems like the Switch. Back in Battle Network 2, 3, 4, you still you were doing the GBA link stuff, and it wasn't like a true wireless experience that was user friendly. Now we've got the Switch, and we've got these other wireless gaming handheld devices that you can just send friend requests and you can just play together wirelessly. That was what Battle Network always wanted to be and could actually be now. So I really do think there's space for a brand new Battle Network style game on the Switch that takes full advantage of that wireless compatibility. But I'm not a Capcom executive, so who knows. But and then let's see, there's Legends, which, God, what is there to say about Legends that hasn't been? It's such a special series. It was way ahead of its time in the way it used in-engine cutscenes to tell its story. So many PlayStation games of the era were into using full motion videos, like Final Fantasy VII and such. And not that there's anything wrong with that. FMVs are great, but Mega Man Legends was really a poster child for the idea of telling your story using in-game assets, using the in-game engine, and with in-game cutscenes, and it did it beautifully. It was like playing a Saturday morning anime, or just playing an anime. Period. It was really cool, and the characters' facial expressions, and God, there were such great characters. You got the Bond family, Tron Bond, of course, the Servbots. Teasel Bond, and to say nothing of the caskets. You got Mega Man Trigger, and you've got Roll, Casket, Barrel, Data. God, that set of characters is just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And the story it was building up to, it's such a shame that we never got Legends 3, because as we all know, Mega Man's been stuck on the moon for however many years now. I don't know if he's ever getting off, because Legends 2 does infamously end with Mega Man stuck on the moon, and Legends 3 was probably going to bring him off the moon and have them rescue him and further investigate some of the plot twists they hinted at the end of Legends 2. But as we all know, that was never meant to be, and we never got Legends 3. But I'm still holding out hope that someday we will. I don't really think we will, but I hope we do, because Legends is an incredibly special series, and fans deserve some sort of resolution after the last however many years it's been since Legends 2, like 20 years or something.
Yeah.
And then I guess that just leaves ZX, which ZX is it's good. I wouldn't say it's a great follow-up to the Zero series, but I would say it's good. I think it has a bit of an identity crisis, because ZX, the original ZX, was great. I think it was a strong follow-up to the Zero series. It was interesting to see how the world had evolved from the effects of the ending of the Zero series, and how humans and Reploids finally did actually kind of come together into this kind of biomechanical fusion of a new life entity, where you have humans who are part Reploid, or Reploids who are trying to be more human. And you kind of see that borne out in the Legend series thousands of years later, where there really is no delineation anymore between human and synthetic life. It's all just kind of combined. And so I think it's kind of cool the way the ZX series, whether intentionally or not, did kind of lay the thematic groundwork for the Legend series, because canonically the Legend series does take place thousands of years after the ZX series, which is at the end of the whole classic X-Zero timeline. So ZX was really, the original ZX was great. I love the fact that you could, in a way, you got to play as all of the Guardians, Leviathan, Fafnir, Phantom, and Harpuia. That was really cool that you got to play as all of X's Guardians in biometal form. And then, of course, you got X and Zero themselves in biometal form, which was also really cool. The ZX Advent, though, I don't know. ZX Advent kind of took things in a weird way. You had Model A, who was clearly supposed to be based on Axel, but then, story-wise had nothing to do with Axel, ended up being actually Model Albert, which, was specific to a character in that game. And the English voice acting was really bad, but not bad in a way that was enjoyable. It was just bad. It was kind of the difference between watching the old Street Fighter movie and then watching Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li, which is the original Street Fighter movie is awesome in its badness, but Chun-Li is just bad, and it's just not fun to watch. I kind of see the voice acting in ZX Advent like that. It's just not good, and it was kind of I don't know, the experience. It was kind of a weird Metroidvania type experience. It was Mega Man trying to be a Metroidvania, and the original ZX kind of succeeded at that, sort of, but ZX Advent just did it worse, in my opinion, and had kind of a weird, nonsensical story. And I don't know, ZX Advent took the lore into directions I didn't really like, but the original ZX I thought was great. And I guess before I end, I should say that we did forget a couple of spin-offs when we were talking about Classic and X. People would be upset if we forgot to mention Mega Man and Base, which was kind of like Mega Man 8.5, which I don't think it's a very good game, personally.
I've never played it.
Oh, okay. You're not missing a whole lot. It's got some cool ideas, and I do like kind of the upgrade system in Mega Man and Base, where you can upgrade with Mega Man and Base with permanent power-up parts, kind of like in Mega Man 8. But the game itself isn't great, and you can tell that the levels were designed around Base's abilities more than they were Mega Man's, which makes for a very lopsided experience. So, it was okay, not great. And then, of course, there was Mega Man X Command Mission, which very average across the board as an RPG goes. It just feels like a bog standard 5 out of 10, perfectly average RPG. Nothing particularly bad about it, but nothing particularly great about it. It's just fine. So
again, never played it.
Fair enough. Did you play the Extreme games? I forgot there were Mega Man Extreme 1 and 2 on the Game Boy Color.
No.
Okay, so those were just basically kind of like the Mega Man classic Game Boy games. They were just kind of retreads of the first 3 X games, but in a portable format, and they were fine. Extreme 2 is way better than 1, but neither of them are really anything to write home about.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Now, right before we, conclude our discussion, I take it that everybody's going to be wanting to know about what our thoughts on this. So, Mighty Number 9.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Mighty Number 9, huh?
Yeah. Now, it's
Where
funny because,
begin?
I know, but, context. So, when I had, Gemini Laser over on the podcast like 5 years ago, that was one of the things that we were discussing about because, he is a Mega Man Let's Player. And so, he was kind of like, saying, I'll just see how, the game goes. I'm kind of like a little bit skeptical about it. It's like, it's going to be living up to the hype of that. And it's like, okay, that's fine enough, but I'm excited about it. Oh my God. It's like, where do I begin on how bad it turned out?
Yeah, well, man, there's so much that could be said about Mighty Number 9, and I do recommend, for those of you listening, if you've ever heard of the YouTube channel Stop Skeletons from Fighting.
Oh, yeah, I know who Derek is.
Oh, okay, great. They're fantastic. I'm a huge fan of their content. I'd love to meet him and just say hi and just say he's a big fan. But they did such a great expose on the whole Mighty Number 9 thing, the whole shenanigan, all of it, and I very highly recommend you go watch that just for the complete history of what happened because it's really well researched. But basically, it was I think Mighty Number 9, to sum it up as succinctly as possible, I would say that it was a case of grossly mismanaged expectations and a grossly mismanaged workload. Inafune clearly is a more experienced producer than he is an actual developer. And he's a more experienced businessman than he is a producer. And it just didn't seem like it was obvious to him that trying to port Mighty Number 9 to like 15 different platforms was going to be the massive undertaking that it was. And so they had these milestones that were way too aggressive that they couldn't meet. They had to keep delaying things. And then, of course, there was the whole problem that Inafune and his team in Japan clearly did not have experience running a Kickstarter campaign. They didn't know what is expected of somebody who's running a Kickstarter campaign. And what is expected is visibility and accountability. And he had neither. He would just, they would do the Kickstarter and they would, ask for all this money and be very tone deaf and then just go dark on what they were doing. And then they would resurface to say things like, oh, we're going to spend extra money on, more voice acting or a theme song, or, hey, we're going to start making an animated series now. And it's like, wait a minute, just make the game you promised people and then talk about all this other stuff. But it was as if Inafune was trying to run a Kickstarter as a traditional game studio or a traditional game development. And that just was never going to work. And so I think what happened was what you saw with Mighty Number 9, which was just all these grossly mismanaged expectations and workloads that just couldn't be handled with the development timeline they had established for themselves. And yeah, I mean, they had kind of promised themselves into a corner where they promised, all these ports on every different previous generation and current generation platform, which porting isn't an easy job, despite what armchair, like NeoGAF users or Resetter users or just gaming fans might tell you. Porting isn't just a quick and dirty, easy, one and done. There isn't like a big red porting button that you press and the game is compiled and it's done. Not even close. It's a lot more difficult than that. And for whatever reason, Inafune just didn't perceive the realities of the development in front of him. And I think that's because he's more of a businessman than he is a developer / producer. And, but again, you can hear most of what I just said delivered in a much more professional way in the Stop Skeletons from Fighting video. Yeah.
And I think that, to sum it all up when it comes to Mighty Number 9, I'm the moderator and co-host of a live stream series called Live and Wired. And one of the news articles we were discussing about was Mighty Number 9 and the 3DS port. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm sure you already know this by now, but if you don't, what percentage is the 3DS port in completion?
I'm pretty sure it's 0.
It is 0. You're absolutely correct.
I thought so. Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to come out.
Yeah, and that's a shame, too, because I'm sure fans who were wanting the 3DS port, they're never going to see it.
I mean, it's a shame. It's a shame if they don't get their money back. That I agree with. But is it really a shame? Has anything of value really been lost, if we're being honest with ourselves?
No, of course.
I mean, but on the other hand, I don't want to be too hard on Beck, because I get into this. This is a funny debate that me and Derek from GameXplain have often, which is he thinks that Beck is just trash and that there's no context in which Beck could ever be a worthwhile character or should ever be in a game. And I disagree with that. As bad as Mighty Number 9 was, Mighty Gunvolt Burst on the Switch is actually a very good game, and Inti Creates did a great job with it, and it actually gave Beck and the Mighty Numbers a second chance at life in a game that was much kinder to them and much better for them. So if you played Mighty Number 9 and you hate it, I don't blame you. I did too. But don't write Beck and the Mighty Numbers off entirely. Go play Mighty Gunvolt Burst and see how you feel about it, because I think it's a great game.
Okay, that's fine. Now, let me ask you something, and I think that this was something else that Derek also mentioned. Would Mega Man 11 exist without Mighty Number 9?
You know, that's a good question, and I think yes, I think so. I don't think Mega Man 11 was made in response to anything that happened with Mighty Number 9. I think it was a very serendipitous the way it happened in terms of the timeline. But if you go and read the Game Informer feature that on Mega Man 11 back when it was announced in December, like the January issue of Game Informer, if you read about like all the interviews they did with Mega Man 11's development team, it's very clear that the reason it took so long for us to get a new Mega Man game was very much the reason that I think a lot of us were already kind of assuming, which was the whole Inafune factor, and the fact that, you know, the way Inafune left, it was such a messy breakup. It left so much destruction and chaos in its wake that Capcom just didn't want to have anything to do with Inafune or his franchises or properties for quite a while, and until things smoothed over. And I think there just needed to be enough time and distance put between Capcom and the whole Inafune fallout for them to be able to want to move forward with new projects that are associated with him. And even if you go and read the developers with the producer, Kazuhiro Tsuchiya, I think that's who it is, he straight up says no one in the company wanted to step up and take the mantle of making the next Mega Man game in the post-Inafune era. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody felt like they were qualified. Nobody felt like they wanted to take that risk. And it wasn't until Tsuchiya-san and his team finally did step up almost 8 years later and say, okay, here's our vision for a new Mega Man game. We're ready to execute on this. And Capcom said, yeah, let's do it. And so I don't think it was ever an issue of Capcom hating Mega Man or just wanting to kill Mega Man or not ever wanting to make another Mega Man game ever again. I think it was just always the Inafune factor and the fallout caused by that, meaning that just Mega Man needed to take a little break. And look, I mean, I said this before and I'll say it again. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying that Mega Man was ever truly dead, because even at the height of his supposed death, if you're getting into Smash Brothers, you're not a dead character. I'm sorry. But if Mega Man was truly dead, like actually dead, Capcom would not have greenlit him to be in Smash Brothers.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we can talk about other characters that are quote unquote dead. I mean, if you want to talk about Capcom characters, I would say Firebrand has been a dead character. We haven't seen a game from him.
He wasn't Infinite. He was in Marvel Infinite.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
But
I mean, like for his own game, I meant.
Yeah, Captain Commando, that would be a dead character. Or Klonoa, not that that's Capcom, but you want to talk about a truly tragically dead character. Klonoa, there you go. He actually is dead, and I don't think there's any chance he's ever coming back. But Mega Man, not the same situation. He was in Smash Brothers, and he was still getting new merchandising content, even when he wasn't getting new games.
Right.
So
Mike from Star Tropics would be a good example.
Yeah, Mike is a great example. Exactly.
So I mean, I would say that Mega Man has not been like dead. I would say that he was more or less, kind of like taking a slight break and was in other things. Like he was in the Super Smash Brothers, he was in like the Marvel vs. Capcom. So, he's been around, and also, he's in the comic books, and now he's in the new animated series. So, Mega Man is still like relevant to a lot of people in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly, and it's really exciting to be in this new kind of post-LOL era of Mega Man, because, for a long... I say Mega Man was never truly dead, but that doesn't mean that us fans didn't suffer a great deal, and we did. I mean, being a Mega Man fan throughout, the 2000s, or at least the 2010s, has really been pretty tough, because, Mega Man 10 came out in 2010, and there hasn't really been any new game since. And of course, Mega Man 11 is coming out basically next month. But it's been difficult to be a Mega Man fan in the 2010s. However, I wouldn't say that he was dead. And, but despite that, it is really exciting to be in this kind of post-hiatus era of Mega Man where Capcom seems to be completely in love with the franchise again. They seem to be courting it once again as one of their most iconic characters and franchises. And for the first time since, I don't know, the early 2000s, it actually does feel like the sky's the limit in terms of what could be coming. It doesn't feel like, oh man, we're only getting this one game and that's going to be it. And, everything rides on the sails of Mega Man 11. Like, it does feel like they've got new stuff coming, and that there's, for the first time as a fan, we don't know what to look forward to, but it feels like there's a lot to look forward to, and that's exciting for me as a fan.
Yeah. One final question right before we conclude it. So, why do you think that Mega Man has stood the test of time compared to like other video games franchises or characters?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it probably has to do a lot with the. I think the gameplay, of course, Mega Man is the poster child for that kind of classic NES era jump and shoot, run, jump and shoot. That's what Mega Man does, and he does that better than any other platforming hero from that era. Other characters do it as well. Mario, he runs and jumps. He shoots fireballs, but it's different. Mario, he jumps, he breaks bricks. That's his thing. Sonic spins ashes. He rolls around. That's his thing. Simon Belmont, he whips, and he has that weird jump where once you commit, you've really committed and you can't change direction in midair. But Mega Man, he is the run, jump, and shoot guy, and I think those iconic controls really help. Like the controls are so dead on for the NES Mega Man games, and they have been really across the whole series. And so I think you've got that. I think there's a combination of that really, really just high quality gameplay, the whole open-ended idea where you can challenge the Robot Masters in any order you want. That wasn't something that was seen very often back in the day. So Mega Man, in a way, was kind of the pioneer of open-ended game design in a platformer in a way. So that was really cool. So I think you've got, Mega Man has this combination of really strong gameplay and pioneering some really cool ideas back in the day. But also, I think he's just got that iconic appearance that stands the test of time. It's you could ask the same question: why is Astro Boy still relevant? Why does Astro Boy still matter in the hearts of so many anime fans? Same kind of thing. He's got that iconic appearance and that kind of just that. He's just a good guy. He's like the consummate good guy, and Mega Man clearly is based on Astro Boy. Like that's obvious. And you've got Mega Man is just this consummate good character. He's a good guy who fights Dr. Wily, who is always the bad guy. And in an era where so many other games like to challenge the conventions of what good and evil mean, and have these really, really in-depth stories that really make you question things and really make you look at things differently, that's all great. That's all well and good, and I love that kind of stuff. But it is really nice to have just a classic, uncomplicated hero versus villain, good versus evil story to always fall back onto. That kind of, it's like comforting, and Mega Man's always going to be fighting Dr. Wily. He's always going to be that good guy fighting the good fight for, to protect people who can't protect themselves from the villains of the world. And I think Mega Man and Dr. Wily just kind of represent that fun, classic, good guy, bad guy dichotomy that is relevant in any age. It's relevant, no matter how, what the topic of the day is, or how society evolves or whatever. Good versus evil, it's a classic story beat. It's something that anybody can get behind, and it's something that anybody can appreciate. And I think that's one reason Mega Man continues to endure, alongside the obvious stuff of just it being really great gameplay and pioneering some really interesting ideas in the early days of platforming.
Yeah, that's a very good answer, Ash. I really do appreciate your thoughts on it.
Well, thank you very much. I was hoping I wasn't getting too long-winded there. I have a tendency to talk and talk and talk, so thank you.
That's okay. I mean, that's what podcasts are for.
That's true. That's true.
All right. I guess we can conclude this episode of Casual Chat. So please, Ash, plug and promote your stuff.
Sure. Well, you can find me on GameXplain, of course. That's youtube.com/GameXplain. And I'm one of the GameXplain crew, where we do all sorts of news updates and reviews and features and previews and discussions on various games, mostly Nintendo focused, but really on everything. And of course, you can also find me, you can find me in various Udon Entertainment video game art books. I was their senior editor for quite a while, so I was responsible for a lot of their books. I am also, if you are a Homestuck fan, if you have played Hive Swap Act 1, that is the Homestuck adventure game, I was the producer on that. And if you happen to be playing any of the Hive Swap Friend Sim spin-off games right now, I have been the producer or one of the producers on all of those. So those Homestucks out there who might be listening, hi there, and thank you for playing our games. And and otherwise you can find me on Twitter at Ash Paulsen. That's just my name. That's ASHPAULSEN. And you can find me on Instagram at the same place.
All right. Well, once again, Ash, thank you so much for coming on by.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'd love to come by again anytime. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. Maybe when Mega Man 11 comes out, maybe we'll give our discussion about it, or anything that you want. I'd love to have you back again.
Nice. Well, anytime, I'd love to do it, and thanks again for having me.
Oh, absolutely. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Let us know in the comments below about what was your first introduction to the Mega Man franchise. Was it the Classic Series, X, Battle Network, Star Force, Game Boy games, cartoon, whatever? Please let us know. Hope to see you around soon, and thank you for listening.